architecture, and I had a choice finishing the Liceo Artistico in Torino. I had the choice between industrial design, sculpture, painting, or architecture. So at the time, I had an important experience, a mixed kind of experience, because since I couldn't afford the fee, I spent half of the time washing dishes, setting up tables, and also serving the family, the Mr. Wright family. And the other half was divided between construction, some model work, not very much, and there was an equivocation between me and the sister of Mr. Wright and her husband, Uncle Vlado and Hans Sophie. And that was a consequence of some, we were left in Taliesin West for the summer. The whole group left, and we were left there, 3 of us, 4 of us, other apprentice and myself, and Uncle Vlado and Aunt Sophie, and we didn't get along very well with them, so Mr. Wright got upset. So he ended up by inviting us to be very politely to leave. He was very polite with the other people. They were really hurt because they were senior apprentice and they really loved Mr. Wright and so on. But he was very rigid about it. Taliesin West was much older in construction and in residence. So it was a very good change of atmosphere, of climate, and of people. And in Taliesin East, I did mostly guys there. There was the Guggenheim still in process of being worked out. There were some projects for California. There was the Triangle in Pittsburgh. That came about because Elizabeth Mock, that was writing the book on bridges, that was published by the Museum of Modern Art. She asked me if I liked to design it because Mr. Wright had a bridge that was going to go on in the book.
Okay.
So I said, well, why not? So that's very strange because we were there learning to make ceramics from this family.
Okay.
And this family had needed more space, so they had some land that they were cutting off the slope on the hills. So they cut this very sharp precipice, and they had this very narrow lot. So they asked me to design a fabric land. I said, well, why not? So they liked the design, and they went off sailing without any. We had a bad flood condition in that village, in Vietri. Power went off and water was very scarce for many, many months, and I was there. My wife was in the States because of the wedding of her sister. So we debated, should I come back to the States or should she come back to Italy? We had one girl already. So given the situation in Vietri, we decided we would go back, and that's how we established that. The meaning is the combination of 2 words. Cosa means an object. This is a cosa. This is a cosa. Anti means against or before. So you combine the 2 and you can play around with a little metaphysics. Well, we started the foundation, and when I started experimenting, a little later than starting experimenting with concrete. So when I felt that I was getting into something and I was getting students interested, we decided with my wife that we would set up a foundation, and that would be for experiential learning for students. A mortal accident. When I came back in the States, we tried to see what Santa Fe would offer to us. I mean, we were in a place, so we decided to go to Santa Fe and stay there a few months and see how it would work. A few weeks before we got to Santa Fe, a veteran from the Korean War, an American, was making Korean bells, you know, the classical
Yes.
Korean bell, wind bells. And he had some outlets in Santa Fe. And when he died, those outlets turned, I mean, after we got there and those people were looking for someone that would carry on the bell business of this man. So they asked us and we said, well, wind bells, what's that? So I turned them off in a way. Then I started playing with the idea and I began to design my own windmills. And we presented them to them after a few months and they liked them, so that's how we started. So it was almost a natural thing because Santa Fe wasn't working very well for ceramics. We would have, in the middle of August, sometimes in the morning, our ceramics were frozen, our pots were frozen, so that doesn't work very well. So we decided that maybe we should go back to the area where we knew we had some experience with, which was the Paradise Valley. I mean,
Yes.
where I was experimenting with concrete techniques. But then I never liked the notion of designing single homes because I thought that the city is the thing that really eventually is going to save the race. So I was interested in urban question. I was coming from an urban condition anyhow in Italy. So I was trying to come up with some idea that would make an opening for me into the planning. And I decided to do this Mesa City project, which was pretty involved, and that brought in some notoriety. And then we built a dome house.
Yes.
Which was a very small thing, and in a sense, I don't know why it was so known, but I guess it was the dome experimental period.
Mm-hmm.
So at a certain point, I felt that we were doing quite a bit of work at Cosanti, that I would need more space to develop a larger project. So I started scouting for land, and I happened to fall upon this land, and I liked it a lot, so we decided to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
One condition was that we would not be more than 100 miles from Cosanti, so that for a while we might have to commute, and so that we don't have an enormous distance to cover.
Uh-huh.
So that was 70 miles from our house, not Cosanti. You know that evidently you have to be careful about water in that kind of region, and water was surface water because we had this stream coming through with in the canyon. Then we needed power, and power was on land. There was telephone also on land, and then the land wasn't more than 1.5 miles air straight, I mean, distance from the main highway, a very major highway, so there was idea. And miniaturization is always combined with complexity. You cannot have one without the other one.
Okay.
They are two sides of the same metal. You know, when you have a process of complexification, you also need a process of miniaturization or implosion. When you have a process of implosion, you know that eventually complexity is going to develop, and with complexity comes eventually life forms up to the human mind. So that's a paradigm that I'm definitely with, and I believe is a very important climate in the valley in Phoenix, where Phoenix is, and where Cosanti is. Cosanti it's 3,700 feet above sea level. Phoenix is about 700 feet above sea level. So that makes a difference of about 10, 11 degrees in temperature. Fahrenheit. That doesn't mean that it doesn't get hot, but it doesn't get as stifling as Phoenix can be in July and August. So that's one thing that makes it a little easier. Though in the winter there's something changing, because I'm sitting there waiting, you know, hoping that some more money comes so that we can accelerate the process. So the designs are there, the project is there, so now and then I go over it now. We are pointing out what we call the critical mass for maybe in the next 10 years, but even that would require quite a bit of luck in raising funding and so on. So by the end of this century, I hope we are the exhibit that we put together about 2 years ago in Scottsdale had 8 variations on the team, let's say. The team being the use of this Excedra kind of system for a number of reasons. But we never had anybody coming to us and saying, well, we like the idea, come up with something else. Bells and students and visitors. So the students are very important because of this combination of coming and building, and the building is not a very efficient method because they don't have a background. So every time you have a new group, you have to know way to train them a little. But they built Arcosanti. So that's a very fundamental part of the process. So they come, they pay tuition, and they help. The visitors, we have close to 80,000 visitors between the two places a year. So that helps. They take tours or they buy things. 3 days at Arcosanti, 4 days at Cosanti. So I have the old house, which was the original the thing. That's where I live in Cosanti. At Cosanti, I have a smaller unit, which is just a studio in what we call the East Crescent. There are many activities, including the foundry ceramics and the cafe, the gallery, and so on. But the staff, the designing staff, it goes up and down depending on the needs, and depending very much on available funding. So I have an architect with me. He's a Japanese architect. He's been there for almost 20 years, so I trust him totally. And then we have young architects coming and going depending on the season and the programs they have on their own with the schools and universities and so on. So we do have maybe 3 or 4 people that are permanent or semi-permanent, and then the remaining activity, which is mainly designing and modeling and computer graphics. That's mainly is to go from the gigantic into the minute. So I take Phoenix as a gigantic structure, about 500 square miles. So it's a big structure. And I said, this doesn't work, as we all know. The sign is a demonstration that doesn't work. So why not try to take portions of this giant, fold it over, and make it into a miniaturized system? So what I've been involved from the very beginning is not mega structures, it's mini structures. And that's very important because there was a book about mega structure and that guy didn't know what he was talking about, frankly. You know the guys. But this notion that because you are using a third dimension, you're dealing with mega structure is so senseless. That's where you go. That's where you get the miniaturization. No, and then I say despicable, but I mean I shouldn't go that far. No, non-responsible in general. And the reason is simple. The impact of shelter is the major impact that we are producing on this planet. Far greater than any other impact. So the responsibility of how we shelter people in society is enormous, really enormous. It's critical. It will make life possible or life impossible. And in general, architects are not interested in that. Because if they were interested in that, then they would know that the suburban sprawl is the real killer. At the bottom of all the problems we have, the suburban sprawl, it's there at the center. Why? Because it's the most consuming, the most demanding, the most wasteful, the most pollutant, the most segregational of any other systems. So to engage specifically and only, let's say, in designing nice houses I think ultimately is going to destroy us. That's why I'm saying I think we are attempting to do that on a very minimal way and not always very successfully, but it's an attempt to aggregate activities instead of scattering them, to eliminate segregation as much as we can, and zoning. Zoning, we know now, is destructive. So that's what we are pursuing. But the amount of building that is there is so minimal now that we cannot as yet demonstrate persuasively that that's the way to go. But what I say, well, we had 10,000 years of demonstration, so don't worry about that, because the history of civilization is the history of the city, ultimately, or vice versa. So in order not to blanket the planet with the sprawl of suburbia, with all the consequences, mainly the hyperconsumption the suburbia demands, then we had to look back into the city and really work at it to try to define lively, exciting, great cities. And we're not able to do that, at towers, and so he was trying to move from the two-dimensional system to the three-dimensional system. But in a sense it was naive, because as a first, at the beginning of an idea, he simplified it to the bone. But at the same time, he was a great architect, so he had an elegance in what he was doing. That about almost close to 2,000 miles from Beijing to Hong Kong. Maybe, I think it was 1,500 or 2,000. And most of the traveling was upon farmland. There were some chains of mountains, but mainly farmland. And the pattern was constant. There was a network of dirt road with villages. Each village, the villages would occupy maybe between 20% and 25% of the land. And quite surely they were villages of very poor peasants. When the affluent American dream reaches that land, those villages are going to explode, and they're going to occupy maybe 90% of the land. So goodbye food, goodbye life. And that's very evident. It's there, it's ready to explode. So unless those people are able to move from the two-dimensional village into a three-dimensional town, that's the end of the Chinese experiment. And that's not a small parcel of land, that's thousands and thousands of miles, square miles. And I think that's true also for the other part of China that we didn't see. But it was there, I mean, talking to us. Because that's poverty, I think, in those villages. Or if you want to call it extreme frugality. As soon as they switch from extreme frugality to hyperconsumption, they'll move from autocracy to technocracy, and then to actually Hong Kong is the thing that strikes you as almost unbelievable, because there are those towers about 40 stories high, very close together.
Yes.
And evidently those people use them well, and they live there, and they seem to be satisfied in general. There might be 20 here, 30 there, 15 over there. So it's a pattern that is it's almost inalterable. And then there are smaller units, a little older, where there might be only 20 stories or 30 stories. And we visited one of those units, and we visited the grounds, three levels of grounds. And the community seems to be very lively, children's people, older people, in these public spaces. Very, very lively. Nothing extraordinary in terms of quality or aesthetics, but very successful, I think. Well, I'm in the process of trying to sell part of my archive, in order to have money to build more. And one of the point I'm making is that I'm the last dinosaur in terms of pencil and paper. And one of the most important, probably also because I have this enormous amount of material, pencil and pen. And I think that's a good point because, you know, in a way it's a watershed. Because, as McLuhan said, the media he said it's the message. I don't believe in that, but definitely the media influences the message. So the computer architecture is going to be to demonstrate, to emphasize the difference between the architect that I represent, or let's say of the past, that worked with a pencil, and the new architect that works with the computer. I think there'll be doesn't have to be a chasm or a schism or a break, but definitely it's going to be a transformation. So my answer is that for the majority is going to be mediocrity by the tons, you know, garbage in, garbage out. For the few that really have something to say, it's going to be an incredible frills as you know, the added thing that you put and that makes it contemporary or not. At the core, I think, is this question that we are not facing the problem of the cities. By not facing the problem of the cities, we are not facing the problem of survival. You know, every environmentalist should try to understand that salvation is in the city for their own cause. Because if we don't move into cities instead of moving into suburbia, there's nothing to save, not very much to save. So they're floating midair, and they don't get it. Well, again, have a perception of what reality is and then try to cope with it. And we don't want to do that. The demonstration is that, you know, in the West, consumption is the God. If I can consume tomorrow more than I consume today, I'm successful and I'm happy. Well, that's a straight toward. Well, architects are not enough organized to shape anything. They go about with their own ego, and sometimes they do beautiful things, sometimes they don't do great things. But they are not facing their own responsibility, as far as I know. And naturally, they go where the money is, most of the time. So it's the more we are productive and the more we are consuming, the more architects have a ball to produce the shelter for all this avalanche of things. So by staying in that kind of groove, we are giving up a lot. And what we are giving up is real. I saw it, I liked it, but again, it was a fragment that never developed into a full-fledged operation. And I don't know how Safety feels about that. Evidently, he's been very busy, so I don't know. What do you call it? Idiosyncrasies. And Philip Johnson is an elegant architect, so he's able now and then to come up with something good. But that's what I call is the frill, is the gloss that we put on buildings, and it's not really. I tend to see the beginning and the end in my time gap, so I have to stay coherent with that, and that deals with some kind of philosophy and model things. And if you're interested, I can send you some paper. Oh, maybe you have a copy of the.
Yes, I do.